This is Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. We're joined by Richard Perle, an Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Reagan administration and considered a key architect in the 40th President's strategy to end the Cold War. Mr. Perle also served as chairman of the Defense Policy Board Advisory Committee during the George W. Bush administration. He's currently a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy Research. Thanks for joining us again, Richard.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you.
The New York Times has reported on infighting between the Obama White House and Hillary Clinton's State Department over the handling of Egypt. What's the backstory here, and who do you think was right, Hillary or Obama?
Well, at one time or another, the administration held every conceivable view in response to what was going on in Egypt. At one point, they were for Mubarak. At another point, they were against Mubarak. They wanted him to stay for a while. They wanted him to leave immediately. There was such confusion, it's almost impossible to say who was right. They were wrong at various times and occasionally right.
The unrest in the Mideast that toppled Egypt's president has spread to Libya, Yemen, and now Bahrain. Similar protests in Iran are being handled with an iron fist. Where do you see this all headed?
Well, I'm afraid the Iranians are much more brutal, much more violent, and they seem to be getting away with it. The irony is to hear Ahmadinejad praising what has happened in Egypt as he moves to cut down any expression of opposition to the government in Tehran. But this has been a long time in the making. At this stage in the development of the modern world and all the communications that go with it, it is almost impossible to keep the lid on oppression. So we are going to see a great deal more of this, and in many places, including eventually in Iran.
At President Obama's first solo news conference of the year, he expressed lukewarm support for the Iranian protesters. Is Obama's approach a dangerous game?
Yes, I believe it is, and it was shocking that he didn't identify with the protesters in Iran. Not only is it in the interests of millions of Iranians who want to free themselves from this awful regime, but it's in the American interest. The Iranians are killing Americans at every opportunity in the places where we're now fighting. They support terrorism around the world, destabilize the Middle East, and they're headed toward nuclear weapons. And why the president didn't express support for the opposition, I just don't understand. Maybe that will change now.
Most observers don't see the pro-democracy revolt in Iran toppling the Islamic fundamentalist government there. In your view, what would it take to affect regime change in Iran?
I believe we're going to see regime change in Iran when the Iranian government is compelled to bring hundreds of thousands of thugs into the streets to suppress free expression on the part of the opponents of the regime. Their days are numbered. They've had to resort to brute force, and you can only do that so often. So eventually that regime is going to come tumbling down. I hope it's sooner rather than later.
You recently attended a special screening of the new documentary Uranium about the nuclear threat Iran poses. Can you outline the threat and also explain why Obama isn't taking a more aggressive approach toward Iran?
Well, I think Obama believes wrongly that he can talk the Iranians out of their nuclear weapons program. He's been trying to do that now since he became president, and previous administrations tried it too. It isn't going to work. They are bound and determined to acquire nuclear weapons. They're not going to give them up at the bargaining table. And until Obama understands that, he will continue not only to tolerate forward movement in the Iranian program, but he will continue not to identify with the opponents of the regime out of a fear that the regime will not negotiate with him, even though those negotiations will lead nowhere.
Former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak was a U.S. ally, and it wasn't that long ago he described Iran as a cancer. Can we maintain a strategic alliance with Egypt without Mubarak, and is the Muslim Brotherhood a threat there?
Well, I hope we can maintain a strategic alliance with Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood is potentially a very serious problem, since the Muslim Brotherhood is committed to the global expansion of an extreme approach to Islam, which is strict Sharia or Islamist law. And it will be very difficult if the Muslim Brotherhood comes to power. I know a lot of people take a different view now, but they're not looking at what the Muslim Brotherhood has done from its inception, and they're not listening to what the Muslim Brotherhood is saying in Arabic. They're listening to what is being said in English, and that's a very different story.
And one final question. An Iraqi defector codenamed Curveball has admitted lying about Saddam Hussein's WMD capabilities, which triggered the invasion of Iraq. What's your reaction?
Well, if it had been only Curveball's information, that would have been another story. But there was a lot of information suggesting Iran had a weapons of mass destruction program. So I think it's possible to exaggerate the importance of Curveball. But what it should remind us is that it's very difficult to make intelligence evaluations. And we got this one wrong. The CIA simply got it wrong.
Richard Perle, as always, thanks for your insight and expertise. We appreciate it.
Pleasure to talk to you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.